And I think it's a big gaping hole in curriculum. We teach, maths and we teach English, but we don't teach social interaction. We don't teach listening. We don't teach how to have uncomfortable conversations. We don't teach how to give and receive feedback. Now you tell me which is going to be more valuable for the rest of your life: how to have a difficult conversation or trigonometry. I don't like the conversation of strengths and weaknesses. It's the famous question, in an interview: what's your biggest weakness? Well, I'm a perfectionist. I don't like the conversations of strengths and weaknesses because strengths often have liability. I'm really confident. Okay, in the wrong context, you're arrogant, right? But weaknesses also have silver linings. So for me, I'm chronically disorganized. I'm terrible, right? Every system app works for like a week and then I'm back to being disorganized. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Now, for years, I used to beat myself up for it and say it's a bad thing. It's a terrible weakness. But the reality is it's context. So I was as a young entrepreneur, I was at this networking event, and I met this guy who was like really impressed with what I had to say with my pitch. And he's like, Simon, we have to do work together. Here's my business card. Call me. Let's do this. And I lost the business card basically as soon as he gave it to me. So anybody who was organized would be sending a text from the taxi or at least sending an email the next day. Not Yahoo over here. I lost the business card. There was no way for me to find out what this important piece of business would have led to because I lost the card. 2 weeks later, I found the business card at the bottom of a briefcase. So I emailed him and said, hey, do you remember we met 2 weeks ago? I'd love to reconnect and see if we can work together still. He wanted to work with me more because he thought I was busy. So strength or weakness? The answer is it depends. Now, in general, yes, it is a weakness, it's a liability, and it causes me great stress. But not always is the point. And so, yes, it's important for us to understand our characteristics that we exhibit, of which some of them in certain contexts are huge strengths, and some of the exact same characteristics in the wrong context are huge weaknesses, right? So we have to be very careful when we label people or generations as being strong or weak, because the answer is it depends. Okay, so that's the preface. So when we talk about this young generation, the Gen Z generation, they exhibit many of the same characteristics as the previous generation, but they're quite different in the sense that they're very activist, right? So, for example, in the 1950s and 60s, people hated their jobs back then too. They just went to work every day and just suffered in silence. By the time you get to sort of the 80s and 90s, people hated their jobs, but then they'd at least start talking about it around the office, saying, this job kind of sucks a little bit, And then by the time you get sort of the 2000s, people start speaking up to their bosses, saying, I think we should make it better to work here, And now you're in this young generation, and they're just like, they're like standing up and quitting and I love it, right? And they organize. They're much more, the previous generation would like hashtag tweet my discontent as I'm sitting in my Uber on my way to brunch, but this young generation gets out and organizes and comes together. Plus or minus, it depends. Sometimes it's a huge strength, the fact that they have that kind of energy. But sometimes, as we've talked about as well, they also have the energy to quit instead of having an uncomfortable conversation. So strength or weakness, it depends. And so I think the way we have to approach all of these things is with empathy, which is instead of deciding if it's a strength or weakness, to try and understand where it comes from. Because I can say this generation is irresponsible and will quit before they ask for a raise, or I can say, why is it that they're quitting before they when they just need a raise? What happened between A and B in that thought, in those two actions? And I'm like, oh, they just missed the skill set. Oh, we can totally figure that one out. That one's an easy fix. So I'm not labeling a whole person or a whole generation. I'm not rather recognizing that there's gaps of skills, which we all have. So when you ask me about any of the generations, and they all have strengths and they all have liabilities. And depending on the time frame and the context, sometimes those strengths also become old-fashioned, no longer necessary. They can still cause frustration, they can still cause confusion. We're still looking through them through our own prisms of our own generation. I've definitely caught myself doing it. I do it. My goodness, we never did that when we were kids. When I was their age, I'm actually saying that now. But I think the trial, the test is the practice of empathy, which is another skill that we can teach that's missing. Incidents that we see rising rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, especially in younger generations. So, it's not causal, but it's There's definitely a correlation. It reminds me of when, and I'm old enough for this, some of your listeners are not, but I remember when the internet showed up and e-commerce started. And I remember some of the people who were really into the tech running around thinking this is the death of bricks and mortars. There will never be stores again. And now Amazon opens stores and Rent the Runway opens stores. And turns out the extremes are not great places. It's not the death, it's live alongside. They become different animals. They become different reasons. We go to shops not to get the best deal. You go to websites to get the best deal. You go to shops because it's fun. You go to shops to try stuff on. You go to shops because it's an activity, because our hunter-gatherer instincts, we like foraging and looking for things. It's entertainment. We enjoy the service aspect, It's with our friends. Sometimes it's not about the shops at all. It's just a place, something to do with our friends. It plays a different role. And the smart retailers know that. And so when we talk about work, it's the same. It's the death of the corporate headquarters. It's the death of the office. I'm like, is it though? The reality is this is going to be somewhere in the middle. And I think one thing with all the predictions about what the future of work looks like, I think one thing we can be absolutely sure of is there'll be more flexibility. Where it used to be, hey boss, can I take off next Friday? Can I work from home next Friday? I have to stay home for whatever, right? Becomes emailing in the morning saying I'm working from home today, and everybody's just fine with it. Introverts liking working from home, extroverts like working at the office. But at the same time, sometimes extroverts should stay home because they can get more work done, and sometimes introverts need to come to the office because they need to connect, and we want you to be a part of the culture. And so I don't think, making any predictions about what it will look like, I think is a little foolish at this time. We know it'll be some sort of amalgamation. We know it'll be more flexible, and probably every office will be slightly different, and it'll fit whatever their culture is. And I think the office environment will become one of the selling things, which is if somebody really hates this office environment, they'll find another company where they like the office environment. But I think what's really interesting about the Great Resignation, what's being talked about less in the Great Resignation, is sort of the reasons for it. Some people talk about the government checks that we've gotten, that runs out, so that's not the main reason for it. People talk about how people are quitting to follow their dreams. I've always wanted to be an actor or a writer. Great, and that is definitely a percentage. And I love that, but those numbers aren't big enough. I think what I think is more interesting is that the Great Resignation is an indictment on decades of substandard corporate culture and poor leadership. Because it's a big deal that we're seeing people, especially at frontline level jobs, where leadership used to say of them, they should just be happy to have a job, right? That those people are quitting without new jobs necessarily is a big deal. And they're definitely not all just following their dreams. I think it is because in the past, when you ask those people, how's work? And they'd be like, it's fine. Is it good? No, it's fine. It's a job, it's fine. Well, why didn't you quit? Because the unknown was way scarier than fine. And so they made do with fine, and leadership took advantage. A lot of corporate managers took advantage of the fact that they could get away with fine. We could do the minimum because they're not going to leave. They're lucky to have a job, and what, are they going to go out there in the great unknown? Fine is fine. And then COVID happened, and a lot of people were laid off. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people were furloughed. Some people kept their jobs but just lived in fear. And we all kind of made it out okay. We ate, we had food, most people made it okay. Even if it was difficult, they made it through. And so all of a sudden, the great unknown, a lot less scary. And so when you're offering me fine, I choose unknown. That's a better option. In fact, not only do I choose unknown, I'm going to wait until you fix fine. And I don't think enough companies are recognizing that the Great Resignation is an indictment, that the Great Resignation is a wag of the finger that you have been getting away with substandard culture and poor leadership for too long, and you better fix your stuff. And I think the companies that will have the huge advantages is not the companies that get the balance of in-person or or online work right. I don't think that's what makes it. I think the companies that get the huge advantage moving forwards are the ones that teach leadership to their leaders, that teach these human skills that we've been talking about, that create a corporate environment and a corporate culture that I want to go to every day. And I actually form good, strong bonds with my new tribe, with the people I go to work with. And I'm willing to sacrifice and not get everything exactly how I want it, because I'd rather be here and serve these wonderful group of people. Those are the companies that will have the huge advantage of the next decades or two. You know, I'm not a huge fan of the term self-improvement, right? But I do like the idea of awareness, self-awareness. You know, we all live with blind spots. We all live with missing gaps and pieces of information, which will, by the way, last for the rest of our lives. And there are some people who choose to live a life where living with those gaps is acceptable and they never fill them in, and we would say that they remain stagnant. And arguably, either mentally or physically unhealthy, or getting unhealthier as they get older, you know? For anyone who wants to be a better version of themselves, a more aware version of themselves, I seek out information. And that comes in all kinds of forms, right? It can be in a relationship. So for example, I went and took a listening class. Actually, I should preface with, I was dating someone and she accused me of being a bad listener. And I was like, you do know what I do for a living, right? Like, I'm a really good listener, so I don't know what you're talking about, you know? And then I took this listening class. Turns out I'm an absolutely brilliant listener with people who I'll never see again for the rest of my life. But amongst my friends and family, appalling. So I had this basic skill set that I never applied with the people closest to me, and gave myself an out because, quote unquote, I knew how to listen. And so I realized I was a terrible listener. This was a blind spot, this was a gap. And having somebody love me tell me that didn't work, didn't believe them until, you know, this objective outsider, or at least I just took this class and came to this realization. That was brilliant. That awareness of the blind spot and the awareness of the skills that I need to be a better brother, son, boyfriend, friend, you know? I had to learn how to hold space for someone and then practice. That's awareness. And I think our health is awareness. Unfortunately, some people wait for the breakup to learn that they're bad listeners. Some people wait for the heart attack to realize they're eating poorly. You know, that's awareness. You get awareness by getting a punch in the face. And I think it's a responsibility for every human being, should they want to have value in the lives of others, to seek awareness in how they show up in the world and how the world impacts them, their mental health, their physical health, their ability to maintain relationships and nurse relationships. And you hear me, you hear me say this over again. It's a repeating pattern, which is for those who want to show up better in the lives of others, which is I see being healthy as a service to others. I see being a better listener being a service. I see everything in terms of service to others. There are benefits to you as well, of course. But I think we've neglected for decades the socialness of our animal, and social media and cell phones and the ubiquity of those technologies have complicated our ability to be human. There are others who comment on this as well. Brené Brown talks about this, where we have a young generation that has mistaken vulnerability and broadcast, right? Where you sit in your room by yourself, put your phone on record, and make a video of yourself crying because of the loss of a relationship, and then posting that on Instagram or Snapchat or YouTube or TikTok or whatever your media of choice is, and the hashtag is just being vulnerable, right? And there's nothing vulnerable about that. You were by yourself, broadcasting to the world, live or videoed, it doesn't matter. Do that exact same thing with the person you hurt. That is way more difficult. Don't leave a voice memo saying, hey, I'm really sorry, just taking accountability. Call them or go visit them and look them in the eye and say that exact same sentence that you just left a voice memo for. That's vulnerability. That's really hard. and requires practice, and we avoid it because it's difficult. We avoid it because it's uncomfortable. We choose broadcast not because it's better, it's because it's easier, and then mistake the two. And so the reason to learn to be vulnerable is not for ourselves, it's for our service to others. And I talk about this all the time, which we've confused these things. And once again, going back to what we were talking about before, we've weirdly taken these very pro-social activities and made them selfish. Like, go us. I'll give you my biggest pet peeve, and I've talked about this one before, but it drives me nuts. I was in this meeting once, and there was a woman next to me who was this big-timey yoga instructor, apparently. And the entire meeting, it was a big group of us, she was on her phone under the desk, under the table. And I sort of sneaked over a look, and it's not like she was like, there was a family member in hospital and she wanted to just, stay in touch. She was on social media, I could see, right? And at one point, the conversation at the table turned to being present. And she popped up her head and said, "That's why I love yoga, because it helps me be present." Of which I'm thinking, you're an idiot, And I started to realize we've confused things here, which is we don't get to decide when we're present. We get to practice being present, but you actually are not present until someone else says you are. You don't get to sit with a friend and be like, I feel present, if they don't feel it. That's like me saying I'm a great listener, except I'm not, right? I don't get to self-assign these accolades, especially when they're social. They can only be assigned by another. And so for anyone who's ever practiced meditation, there are absolutely benefits to us, without a doubt. And those are important mental and physical health benefits of meditation and mindfulness, and we should practice those for sure. But there's also what I think is the primary reason, some would consider secondary reason, which is if you practice meditation, for example, you learn to focus on one thing, your mantra, a sound, whatever it is. You learn to, your breath, you learn to, you don't think of nothing, you think of one thing, focus on one thing, right? And if something interrupts that thing, you have a thought. Can I leave the washing machine on? You label it a thought and you push it out of your head and you say, I'll deal with it later. And that's the whole idea, is total focus and the ability to put your thoughts out of your head to stay focused on this one thing. Now think about when you're sitting listening with a friend who's going through a hard time. Are you listening or are you waiting for your turn to speak? Right? The whole meditation practice that you've been doing is now valuable in this moment, where you are focused entirely on what they're saying to you. Every distraction, every screech of a car tire outside, everybody who's talking around you, you don't hear any of it. You only hear what they're saying to you. You're entirely focused on what they're saying to you. And when you have your own thoughts of advice you'd like to give, or things you want to tell them, oh my God, me too, that happened to me as well, right? You say, nope, that's not important in this moment, and you put it out of your head and deal with it later. And at the end of that conversation, your friend will say, thank you, I feel heard, or thank you for being there for me, or thank you for holding space for me, or thank you for listening. And those are all indications that congratulations, you've been present for another. And I think what gives our lives purpose is not to wake up every morning to learn meditation so that we can be present for ourselves, though that is valuable. What gives our lives purpose is to do these things for another. There's nothing wrong with doing things and enjoying the benefit of those things yourself, by all means. But the deep feeling sense of purpose and meaning to one's life or to one's work only comes when those things are for another. And in my view, primarily for another, where our benefit is secondary. You can't have equal. There's no such thing as equal, because at one point, one of those things will have to be sacrificed for the other. And do you sacrifice your spouse's love so that you can stay in love? Or do you sacrifice your comfort? Do you sacrifice your girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse's comfort so that you can be better? Or do you sacrifice your comfort so they can feel better? It's obvious. Well, it's the same here. It's the same analogy, which is I choose to sacrifice my happiness, my joy, my comfort, my Lamborghini in this moment, not forever, but in this moment, for you, my employee, for you, my friend. I will delay so that you can have. And that's where the joy and love of business, relationships, friendships come from. There's a great irony in all of this, which is to sacrifice for another really is the most beautiful thing we can ever do. I mean, that's kind of what love is. It's sacrificing for another. And all of these things, whether it's learning to be a better communicator, learning mindfulness and meditation, being in shape. If you can translate those things in for another, all of those things start to have a higher purpose. And then it's like people have nose jobs, you know? Like somebody says, you can't have a nose job. Why are you? Well, if it makes them feel better about themselves, then how can we argue with it? Like if they went from being really, really insecure and hiding their faces or bad teeth and they never wanted to smile to fixing their teeth and now they smile all the time, like why should we tell them they can't? Now, of course there's a line. Getting addicted to plastic surgery is something different, and there is a line. But, you know, getting your teeth done or getting a nose job to make yourself feel better is fine if it builds your confidence. So if it builds your confidence and you're doing it in a healthy way, you know, then, you know, it's like, how can somebody argue that you shouldn't be exercising so it looks good? Now, again, there is a line. There are some people who actually overdo it, where if they stop exercising, they gain a tiny bit of weight, they actually spiral. There is a line where they're actually not building confidence, they're actually building insecurity. But some of these things don't have to be big and lofty, they can be ridiculously small. Like, so for example, for me, you know, I'm very good at disappointing myself. Like I have no problem disappointing myself, right? Like I'll wake up in the morning 2 hours before my alarm and I'll say to myself, you should work out. Like you're up super early, you've got a busy day and you just got an extra 2 hours. You could like use 30 minutes of that to work out. Get out of bed. I'm like, nah, I'll sit in bed for 2 hours and just like read the newspaper and play Wordle, you know? And 2 hours will go by and I won't work out. Do I have any guilt? None. I'm just like, you're an idiot, Simon, right? Now, if I'm meeting someone at the gym at 7:30 because we're gonna work out, I'll be there. I won't let somebody down. I'm okay letting myself down, but I won't let somebody else down. So for me, my purpose sometimes is very in the moment. Like I'm doing this for them. It's like, you know, when I would run, you know, one of the reasons I stayed in good running shape is because when I ran with my running buddy, I never wanted to ruin their run if they wanted. But to advance through Ranger School, you need to pass 3 tests. You need your instructor to say, yep, you're ready to go to the next level. You need to physically actually perform all the tasks required of you, and you need to pass your peer review. And if you fail any one of those 3, you don't make it to the next level.
Interesting.
And so that becomes an equally weighted component of advancement in the Army Rangers, which is what kind of team player are you, which I love. So we implemented a system of 360 review, which was sort of a bit of an amalgamation of things we'd taken from other groups and made our own, where the way it works is you take the group of people you have regular interaction with, and you fill out your top 3 weaknesses or the places you believe you need to grow the most, with a specific example for each. So top 3 specific weaknesses or places you need to grow the most, and then top 3 specific strengths or the places you believe, 3 examples of the places you believe you've grown the most. They have to be specific. Not like, oh, I'm a much better timekeeper now. No, you've got to give some specific examples. They're collated and distributed amongst the team, and then you come together as a group and you take turns reading them. So first you read your own weaknesses, and then the group has the opportunity to add to that list. And here's the best part. We give a little speech before the whole exercise starts that the people who are going to give you this feedback really don't want to. It's really uncomfortable for them. It's going to be, they would just rather not do this exercise at all. But they're going to do it because they want to see you and help you grow. And so what they're giving you is a gift. And so you have to receive it as a gift, which means you say thank you. You don't have to agree with it. If you don't agree with it, say thank you and just dismiss it. It's fine. But if it has an emotional impact, if it makes you angry or frustrated, it's probably true. Right? And we go around the room and people can add to this list of these weaknesses in any way there's no format. They can do it in any way they want. And you sit there and you look them in the eye and you genuinely say, thank you. You're not allowed to say a word except thank you. Then you do your strengths and you read your strengths, and anyone can add to the list. And just as you discovered you have blind spots you didn't know you have, you discover that you have strengths that you didn't know you had, that you're having a positive impact on the lives of others that you didn't know you were. And it's a magical experience. There's usually tears at some point because it's powerful and it's a safe environment. I wouldn't recommend an organization start there. I would recommend you build towards that, because you're going to put very senior people and very junior people in the same room, and they're going to have very blunt conversations with each other. And it's real, right? It's not a place to start, but it is a place to get to. And there are variations for it. That one takes a lot of time. We varied it as where everybody's responsible to do it, and you have 2 people assigned, and you can choose 1 or 2 people to join, and you just have a smaller group when you want to do it. It's just for you, so the others don't do it in that moment. It's a little more efficient to do it that way.